Daniel Walker woke before the alarm, the way he often did now, not suddenly, just awake. He lay there for a moment, eyes open, listening. The house made its usual sounds, a low creak somewhere in the walls, the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the kind of noises you stop noticing unless you're awake before everyone else. Beside him, his wife slept on her side, one hand tucked under the pillow. Her breathing was slow and even. Daniel noticed it the way you notice something familiar you've learned to trust. He didn't reach for her, not because of distance, just because the moment didn't call for it. He sat up carefully, pausing at the edge of the bed while his feet found the cold floor. His lower back protested, not sharply, just enough to be acknowledged. He stood still for a second, waiting for his body to catch up with his intentions. Then he reached for the flannel shirt draped over the chair and pulled it on, button by button, without thinking much about it. Downstairs, the kitchen light flicked on with a soft click. The clock above the sink read 5:12. It ticked steadily. Louder in the quiet, Daniel filled the coffee maker with water, measured grounds by habit, and pressed the button. The machine rattled to life. He leaned against the counter and rubbed one hand across his face, dragging his fingers down over his eyes. The smell of coffee came quickly. It always did. He poured a mug and carried it to the small table by the window. The chair scraped slightly as he sat. Outside, the fields lay flat and open, still holding on to the night. A thin line of light sat low on the horizon, barely there. The ground looked firm and patient, like it wasn't in a hurry to become anything else. Daniel took a sip. Too hot. He set the mug down and wrapped both hands around it instead. He had been doing mornings like this for a long time, long enough that they blended together. Workdays, weekends, seasons changing without much announcement. He remembered when mornings used to feel different, when the house was louder, when there were lunches to pack and doors slamming and questions asked from the hallway. Those years felt far off now, not painful to recall, just settled. When his father died, Daniel had stepped in without much discussion. Someone needed to handle things. He did. When the kids were young, there was never much time to wonder if he was ready. He just moved forward. Bills got paid, repairs got done, people depended on him, and he didn't mind that. He still didn't. What surprised him lately was the tiredness, not the kind that came from a hard day. This was quieter. It showed up in small ways. How long it took him to get moving in the morning, how often he sat a moment longer before standing, how little he expected from the day ahead. He stared out the window and watched a bird land on the fence line, hop once, then fly off again. Nothing special about it, just something happening. Daniel rested his elbows on the table. The wood was worn smooth where years of use had softened it. He ran his thumb along the edge without realizing he was doing it. In his mind, he formed a thought that wasn't quite a prayer, not quite a complaint either. "I'm still here," he seemed to say inwardly. "I'm still willing." The clock kept ticking. The coffee cooled. Daniel sat there until the sky brightened enough to show detail in the fields. Furrows, fence posts, the shape of the land he knew so well. Another day was beginning, whether he felt prepared for it or not. He stood, rinsed the mug, and set it upside down in the sink. As he turned off the kitchen light, he paused for a moment, hand still on the switch. There was no clear thought behind the pause, just a sense of waiting. Some seasons asked for action, others asked for something less obvious. Daniel didn't know which one this was yet. He only knew he felt full of years, of effort, of responsibility, and strangely unfinished at the same time. The house remained quiet as he stepped outside to begin the day. The air outside was cold enough to wake him fully. Daniel pulled his jacket closed with one hand and stepped off the porch. The wood creaked under his weight, the same board near the steps giving its familiar complaint. He paused, glanced down at it, then moved on. The sky had lightened, but only just. Everything looked washed in grey. No birds yet. Just the faint outline of the fields and the fence stretching away from the yard. He walked toward the shed, hands in his pockets, boots pressing into the packed dirt. His breath showed when he exhaled. A truck passed somewhere beyond the trees, tires humming on the road, then gone. Inside the shed, the smell was the same as always. Metal, dust, old oil. He stood there a moment, eyes adjusting. Tools hung where they belonged. A coil of rope sat on the shelf, half neat, half forgotten. Daniel reached for the rake, tugged it free, and noticed one of the tines bent slightly outward. He nudged it straight with his boot. It didn't need to be perfect. He worked along the fence line, pulling leaves into small piles. The motion was steady, familiar, bend, pull, step. The rake scraped softly over the ground. Leaves rustled and shifted. His shoulders warmed as he moved. The work didn't ask much of him, and he appreciated that. A gust of wind scattered the first pile he'd made. Daniel stopped, rested his hands on the rake handle, and looked at it. He didn't swear, just waited for the wind to pass, then gathered the leaves again, slower this time. As he straightened, his back tightened. He rolled his shoulders once and then again, listening to the quiet crack that followed. It wasn't pain, just a reminder. He leaned on the rake and looked out across the field. The land lay open and still. Furrows faintly visible now that the light had grown. Fence posts stood where they always had. Nothing urgent about any of it. Daniel stayed there longer than necessary. A thought surfaced. Not sharp, not fully formed. More like a question that had been circling him for a while. He didn't answer it. Instead, he remembered his father, years ago, standing almost exactly like this. One hand on a tool, eyes on the land, saying very little. Daniel hadn't known then what his father was thinking. He suspected now that his father might not have known either. The memory passed without ceremony. Daniel finished the row and dragged the leaves toward the compost area. The pile landed unevenly. He looked at it, considered fixing it, then left it as it was. Inside the house, warmth met him at the door. The clock over the sink read a few minutes past 6. He washed his hands slowly, dirt swirling away, and dried them on the towel that hung slightly crooked on its hook. His wife was awake now. He heard her moving in the bedroom, a drawer sliding open, the soft thud of it closing. When she came into the kitchen, her hair was still loose around her shoulders. "Morning," she said. "Morning." They sat across from each other with their coffee. She glanced at the calendar, frowned slightly, then smoothed the page with her fingers. Daniel watched the steam rise from his mug and disappear. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. When it was time to leave, Daniel stood at the door and checked his pockets. Keys, wallet, phone. He pressed his hand flat against his jacket for a second, as if checking for something else, then let it drop. Outside, the light had settled into the day, clear enough now. As he stepped off the porch again, Daniel felt it. Not a thought, not a warning, just a quiet sense of being held in place for a moment longer than he expected. The day was ready. He wasn't sure if he was, not yet. And for the first time in a while, he didn't rush past that feeling. Daniel took the same road he always did, past the feed store with its sun-faded sign, past the curve where the trees leaned in a little, branches meeting overhead. He drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the window. The radio stayed off. He preferred it that way. At the stop sign near the county line, he came to a full stop. He waited, longer than he needed to. There was no one coming. But he stayed still a moment more, eyes on the empty road ahead. Then he eased forward. The morning went as expected. People stopped by his desk. Questions were asked, answers were given. Daniel listened, nodded, wrote things down. He noticed how often others watched his face while he spoke, as if looking for reassurance more than information. Around mid-morning, he caught himself staring at a clipboard, reading the same line twice. He blinked, shifted his weight, and turned the page. It wasn't a problem, just a pause. At lunch, he sat in his truck with the window cracked. The air smelled faintly of cut grass. He unwrapped his sandwich, smoothed the paper beneath it, and ate slowly. A man walked past and lifted a hand in greeting. Daniel returned the gesture. He took a sip of water and rested his head against the seat for a few seconds, eyes closed, not sleeping, just still. A breeze moved through nearby trees, leaves brushing against one another. Then it passed. The afternoon carried on without much to mark it. At one point, Daniel stood in the doorway of a storage room, hand on the frame, trying to remember what he'd come for. He smiled to himself, almost amused, then spotted the box and picked it up. On the drive home, clouds sat low over the fields. The light had softened, the edges of things less sharp. He drove a little slower than usual, letting the truck follow the road without correction. When he pulled into the driveway, he turned the engine off and stayed where he was. The ticking of the cooling motor filled the cab. A leaf skittered across the concrete, caught in a small swirl of wind, then disappeared into the grass. Inside, the smell of food met him. His wife stood at the counter, chopping vegetables. The knife made a steady sound against the board. "Hey," she said, not looking up. "Hey." He washed his hands and leaned against the counter across from her, watched the way she gathered the chopped pieces with the blade of the knife, careful, practiced. He thought about saying something, nothing important, just something, and then didn't. They ate as the light outside faded. Conversation stayed simple. Plans for the next day, a reminder about a phone call. Daniel listened more than he spoke. He felt present, but slightly off-center, like a chair that rocked just enough to be noticed. After dinner, he stepped outside. The air had cooled again. Crickets had started up near the edge of the field. He stood with his hands in his pockets and looked out at the darkening land. He didn't try to sort anything out. He didn't reach for words. He just stood there until the sky deepened and a few stars appeared, one by one. Something in him felt tired, not suddenly, not sharply, but in a way that had been there a long time, quietly asking to be noticed. Daniel acknowledged it the way you acknowledge a familiar ache, not with alarm, just with honesty. When he went back inside, he carried the quiet with him. He didn't know what it meant. He only knew it felt necessary to let it stay. Some things didn't move when pushed. They waited. And for now, Daniel was willing to wait with them. Daniel woke before the alarm again. He stayed where he was, eyes open, listening. The ceiling fan clicked once as it turned. Somewhere downstairs, the refrigerator started up, then settled into its low hum. He dressed in the half-dark and went to the kitchen. The light over the sink came on softer than he remembered. He poured coffee into the same chipped mug and sat at the small table by the window. A thin crack ran along the corner of the glass. He didn't remember when it had shown up. The curtain hung unevenly, letting in a narrow strip of light. He straightened it, then left it alone. Outside, a low mist hovered over the fields. It wasn't thick enough to hide anything, just enough to blur the edges. Daniel rested his arms on the table and watched it thin as the light grew stronger. He stayed there longer than usual, long enough for the coffee to cool. When he stood, his knees complained. He paused, hand on the back of the chair, then moved on. At work, a small thing went wrong. A piece of equipment that usually started without question hesitated. Daniel tried again. Nothing. He waited, hand resting on the switch, then tried once more. It coughed and caught. One of the younger men nearby exhaled. "Thought it was done," he said. Daniel shook his head. "Just needed a minute." He felt the words settle as he said them. Later, while sorting through paperwork, Daniel found a note tucked into a folder. His own handwriting, years older than he felt. A reminder written in the margin. "Check this again later." He stared at it for a moment, then folded the page back where it had been. On the drive home, rain came and went, light enough that he didn't bother with the wipers. The drops stretched across the windshield and slid away as the truck moved. That evening, he stayed at the kitchen table while his wife sorted the mail. He picked up an envelope with his name on it, turned it over once, then set it aside. "Everything all right?" she asked, not looking up. "Yeah," he said. He waited a beat. "Just tired." She nodded and kept sorting. No concern, no pressure. The quiet between them felt steady. Before bed, Daniel paused in the doorway of the spare room. Boxes lined one wall. A folded ladder leaned in the corner. Dust gathered where footsteps no longer reached. He rested his hand on the frame, then let it fall, and moved on. In bed, he lay awake while his wife shifted beside him. Her hand brushed his arm, stayed there without intention. He didn't move it away. Daniel closed his eyes. The day had asked nothing more of him than attention, and for now, that felt enough. Daniel sat in the truck a moment longer than usual after parking at work. The engine was already off. The keys rested in his hand. He hadn't decided to pause. He just noticed he was doing it. The steering wheel felt cool. He shifted in the seat, exhaled once, then opened the door and stepped out. Later that morning, someone stopped by and asked if he could take on an extra task. Nothing urgent, just another thing to add. Daniel listened, hands resting on the edge of the desk. He nodded. Then he asked when it actually needed to be done. The man blinked, thought about it. Probably not today. "All right," Daniel said. "Let's look at it tomorrow." The answer hung there. Simple, acceptable. They both moved on. At lunch, instead of sitting in his truck, Daniel walked around the building. He found a picnic table set back near a line of trees, one he'd passed plenty of times without stopping. The wood was rough. One bench dipped slightly in the middle. He sat anyway. A breeze moved through, carrying the smell of damp ground. Someone laughed somewhere inside the building. A door slammed. Daniel unwrapped his sandwich, folded the paper beneath it, and ate without looking at his phone. Halfway through, he noticed his shoulders. They weren't pulled up around his ears like usual. He rolled them once, slowly, then left them where they settled. On the drive home, he took a road that curved wide through open land. He didn't check the clock. The fields stretched out on either side, quiet and unchanged. He drove a little slower, letting the road lead. At home, his wife asked if he'd be late the next day. "I don't think so," he said. After a second, he added, "If something comes up, I'll let you know." She looked at him just briefly, not questioning, just noticing. Then she nodded and went back to what she was doing. After dinner, Daniel carried a chair out to the porch and sat. The wood creaked under his weight. He adjusted his position until it steadied. The light faded in small increments. Crickets began their steady rhythm. A dog barked down the road, then quieted. He rested his hands on his thighs and stared out at the darkening fields. He still felt tired. That hadn't gone away, but it didn't press on him the same way. It sat there, acknowledged. A thought drifted through, half-formed. He didn't try to hold it in place. He stayed until the air cooled enough to raise bumps along his arms. Then he stood, knees stiff, and went back inside. Before turning out the light, he paused by the window and looked out once more. The land was still. Nothing had shifted. Nothing needed to. Daniel didn't feel rushed. He simply felt willing to wait for whatever came next without forcing it to arrive. The first person to notice was someone Daniel didn't know well. They worked near each other most days, exchanged nods, little else. That morning, they crossed paths by the loading area and both slowed. "You got a minute?" the man asked. Daniel glanced at his watch, then let his arm fall back to his side. "Yeah." They stood while a forklift passed, its warning beep sharp in the open space. The man talked about a problem he'd been carrying at work. Not dramatic, just something that wouldn't leave him alone. Daniel listened. Weight shifted onto one leg, hands in his pockets. He nodded once when the man finished. "That won't sort itself out fast," Daniel said. "But it will sort out." The man let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "That's what I was hoping." They went their separate ways. No handshake, no advice given. Still, the moment stayed with both of them. Later, a younger co-worker leaned against the doorway of Daniel's office. "How much longer you think you'll stay here?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Daniel leaned back in his chair. The chair creaked slightly. He looked past the man for a second, then back. "I'm not sure," he said. "I'm watching it." The answer seemed to satisfy something. The younger man nodded and moved on. That evening at home, his wife mentioned it while putting dishes away. "You seem different," she said. "Quieter." Daniel dried his hands on the towel. "Is that bad?" She shook her head. "No, just different." Over the next few days, similar moments stacked up without making a fuss about it. People stayed a little longer when they spoke to him. Conversations took their time. Daniel didn't rush to respond, and no one rushed him. One afternoon, a neighbor came by asking for help moving something heavy. Daniel agreed, then paused when his back tightened. "Give me a second," he said. They adjusted the plan, lifted slower. It worked. That night, Daniel sat at the table with a mug of tea, though he usually preferred coffee. The mug was warm against his palms. He watched the steam rise and fade. He didn't feel accomplished. He didn't feel behind. He felt present. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It had shape, and he let it be. It happened on a regular afternoon. Daniel stopped at the hardware store on his way home. The small one off the county road, with the bell that always rang too sharply when the door opened. He needed a box of screws and some wire. Nothing unusual. The place smelled like wood, dust, and oil. A radio played low behind the counter. The man working there looked up, nodded once, and went back to what he was doing. Daniel moved down the aisle at an unhurried pace. He picked up one box of screws, turned it over, then set it back and chose another. Read the label again, even though he already knew what it said. At the end of the aisle, an older man stood with a tape measure in his hand. He pulled it out a few inches, let it slide back in, then did it again. "These hold up?" the man asked, lifting it slightly. Daniel stepped closer and took a look. "Yeah," he said, "they're fine." The man nodded. Neither of them moved right away. The radio crackled. Someone laughed near the front of the store. "You fixing something?" Daniel asked. The man shrugged, thinking about it. Daniel smiled, faintly. "That's usually the longer part." The man gave a quiet chuckle, then went on his way. Outside, the afternoon had warmed. Daniel set the bag in the truck bed and rested his hand on the tailgate. Across the road, grass bent in the wind and straightened again. A fence line ran uneven along the edge of the field. He stood there longer than necessary. For weeks, he had thought of himself as waiting, for clarity, for direction, for something to tell him it was time. Standing there, hands still on the metal, he understood something small and steady. He hadn't been waiting. He'd been paying attention. The difference settled without needing words. At home, he set the bag on the counter. His wife sat on the floor in the living room, a box of old photographs open beside her. A few were spread across the coffee table. "Do you remember this?" she asked, holding one up. Daniel knelt beside her to look. The kids were younger, sunburned, smiling without thinking about it. "Yeah," he said, "I remember." They sat there a while, not sorting, just looking. That evening, Daniel went out to the porch and sat. He didn't shift the chair this time. It held. The air moved lightly. Somewhere down the road, a screen door slammed and then quiet returned. He rested his hands on his knees and breathed, slow, even. There was still work to be done. That hadn't changed, but it no longer felt like something he had to hold together by force. He stayed until the light faded and the first stars showed. Not waiting. Just there. Nothing changed in a way you could point to. Morning still came early. The house sounded the same when it woke. Pipes knocking once, the floorboard near the hallway giving its small complaint. Daniel moved through it without marking anything as different. A few days later, he stepped outside to take out the trash and didn't go back in right away. He stood near the fence instead, hands resting at his sides. The ground felt cool through the soles of his boots. He shifted his weight, eased the stiffness in his knees. A bird landed on the fence rail, tilted its head, then lifted off again. Daniel watched until it disappeared over the field. From inside, his wife called his name. Not urgent, just checking. "I'm here," he said. "Okay," she answered, and left it at that. That evening, they sat on the couch with the television on low. She leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. Daniel adjusted slightly so she could settle. They stayed like that, the room dim, the screen flickering without sound. At the sink later, he rinsed his mug and set it upside down on the towel. The water left his hands warm. He dried them carefully, then turned off the light. Sleep came without effort that night. Not heavy, just enough. In the morning, he woke before the alarm and stayed where he was for a moment, listening to the house breathe. Nothing pressed on him. Nothing needed attention yet. He made coffee and sat by the window. The fields beyond the glass were just beginning to show themselves. Light moved slowly across the ground. Daniel didn't feel finished. He didn't feel like he'd arrived anywhere. He felt steady. As he stepped outside to begin the day, he paused at the door only for a moment, long enough to notice where he was standing, long enough to take it in. Then he went on, not waiting, not pushing, just moving with the time he was given. Sometimes the most important changes don't come with decisions or announcements. They arrive the way this story did, slowly, through attention, through pauses we didn't plan to take. If part of you recognized yourself in Daniel, it's not because his life was dramatic, it's because his tiredness was honest, and his clarity didn't come from pushing harder, but from listening longer. Many of us keep moving because we're capable, because others rely on us, because stopping feels irresponsible. But there's a difference between carrying what is yours and carrying everything out of habit. If this story gave you even a moment of quiet, a sense of being understood without being explained, then you're not finished here. The next story waiting on your screen continues that same conversation. Another ordinary life. Another moment where something small changes everything. Not with noise, not with answers handed out, just with truth, patience, and room to breathe. If you want more stories like this, stories that don't rush you, don't lecture you, and don't ask you to pretend you're stronger than you are, subscribe to the channel and stay. The next story is already waiting.